So the topic we want to go into is if you're going to give a reduction in your bill to an attorney, okay, in a personal injury case, what should you base that on? Well, let's go into the factors of what you should base it on. Some of them are going to be real strong. And so you not only want to be familiar with the factors, but which ones are really strong that you pay a lot of attention to. So let's go. And there's several factors that you want to consider if you want to give a reduction and how much of a reduction you want to give. So let's take a look at these factors here. All right, so these are the factors that we're going to consider. They're not in any particular order, but we'll identify the importance of them. So let's just go through one at a time here. So number one is it's why you must know liability limits from the start. We talked about this extensively. You have to know what are the limits of this case, because remember, all these, depending on the state you're in, if you're in a fault, no fault state, this gets to be very, very important, especially if you're in a no fault state. If you're in if you're in a no fault state and you've got, like here in Florida, you got 10,000, the main thing there is, did your bill exceed the 10,000, or with medicals, was a certain percent of it already taken? Like say they went to the hospital. Well, now all this becomes real important. You got to know, you got to coordinate with the attorney, coordinate what are the limits, what's involved here with the limits of medicals with this patient. And it's what can you do relative to what limits you have? How important is it to do these diagnostics or these tests relative to the case you have and the limits you have? So that's why it's real important to communicate with the attorney right up front and go, well, what are the limits of this case? And then letting the attorney know what you're doing and what you're expecting to do and why you're doing it. Now, again, this gets back to, remember, everything changes. The whole dynamic of the relationship with the attorney changes 180 degrees, whether you've given that presentation or not. You will always be seen as second fiddle. You'll be pushed around until you give that presentation and you become the authority figure. So when I talk to the attorney's taking my advice on whether or not we should do the test or not him. Remember, the attorney should never be giving you clinical advice, and you should never be giving the attorney legal advice. That's not what's going on with weak chiropractors. Well, uneducated, weak chiropractors. They're just whatever the attorney says. Well, do an MRI, do this, wrap the case up. I just was talking to a doctor the other day. I go, well, what do you do when when an attorney tells you to wrap the case up? He goes, well, I wrap it up. I said, even if they're in the middle of the repair phase of healing? They didn't know how to handle it. Okay. Number two, you must have power of attorney signed. You got to know what's going on. You got to have access to everything. And what does that mean? It means you got to have the limited power of attorney signed for that case. And that's your patient that signs it. Remember, the LOP, the protection is for the attorney. The limited power of attorney is your patient signs it. So you have all rights that the patient has when you ask for bills, what was paid, when it was paid, how much was paid, the insurance liability, anything that patient has access to, you have access to. You've got to get that limited power of attorney signed. Number three, sometimes cutting your bill is legitimate. Now, most of the time it's not. I will tell you, it's not. That's if, remember what the big ratio is 3-to-1. If your documentation, your medicals gives at least a 3-to-1 injury award. So if your bill was $5,000, and let's say you was the only bill, you should have at least gotten $15,000 back, or one of two things has happened. Usually could be a third one, but typically you've got bad documentation. That's usually number one, 9.9 out of 10 times. You got bad documentation. And infrequently, it's the attorney doesn't push. They're kind of weak and they just fall over. They just cave. So that's, you got to be aware of how strong your case is also. And I'll cover that. That's a separate item we'll go into. But every now and then there is a legitimate case. And one example is one of my clients. They were dealing with this patient, and it turns out he was coordinating everything, but bottom line is, when it all was said and done, that it turns out they didn't have the insurance that was needed for the different providers. There was a hospital involved. He was involved. There was a medical doctor. So there was a lot of providers involved. And bottom line is, he had to take a cut with everybody else to make sure that the patient, the attorney got something and the patient got something. So in that particular case, that was kind of a legitimate situation. What is the injury award off? But remember, I told you, I've never been asked by any of my attorneys to cut my bill after I've given that presentation. In the very beginning, prior to me selling them and creating authority and credibility and showing them the ratio of 3-to-1 medicals, that was the first thing out of their mouth, cut your bill. I learned real quick. That's when I learned real quick. You got to get that to the presentation at the beginning, not at the end. It's too late if you've waited to the end. Okay. What is the injury award offer? You've got to know what that is. And you want to, how do I say this? You don't want maybe, kind of, sort of. You want to know what it is, black or white. Don't let your attorney say, well, it looks like it's only going to be X. What does that mean? It means nothing. He just said it looks like. No, I want to know what it is, period, black or white. What is it? You don't want an attorney saying, oh, it looks like it's going to be, and gives you this low number. You cut your bill, and then it turns out he got a good settlement after all, because you didn't follow up with specifics and go, no, what is it? Black or white? What is it? Not maybe, not kind of, sort of. So remember, the document should create at least a 3-to-1 injury award relative to your medical bill. That's the absolute kicker right there. There's a few major key points that attorneys look at. That's number one. That's like one of the biggest ones. Did we at least get a 3-to-1 relative to medicals? And the reason for that is they'll at least have enough money for them to make their money, and some money for to give to the patient. Because remember, their client. That's the number one single thing the attorneys care about. So when you look at this whole picture, that's the number. And think about it. If you were an attorney, how would you feel when everything's settled, the person hired you, and you were taking 33%, and it turns out the patient made less than you? You took your 33%, and by the time the medical bills and your bill and the injury offer was less than 2-to-1, and now the patient made less than the attorney and the whole thing. Well, what does the attorney know is going to happen? He's going to get bad reviews, bad reputation. I mean, that's one thing. That's the number one thing from the attorney's side. Will the patient at least make as much as me or more? That's why you look at it as a third, a third, a third. Back 30 years ago, it was more common to do a third, a third, a third, until the documentation kept getting worse, but also the attorneys caved, and the attorneys had to cave and started taking less and less, because they didn't have the documentation to go to war, to fight that lowball offer from the insurance company. That's what's happened over the last 20, 30 years. I mean, it's crazy now. I mean, I've been practicing since 1988. And 3-to-1 injury offers were way more normal back then, even though the documentation wasn't better. But the insurance companies have just gotten harder and harder and harder and played hardball. Why? Because they could. They could. The attorney had nothing to fight with. They had crap for documentation to fight with. And so now it's like common. The common thing now is 2-to-1 or less. That's what's common. So it's really uncommon to get 3-to-1, which used to be more common 30 years ago. Okay, so 3-to-1, that's that big ratio that you want to be paying attention to. The medical bills, the injury award is at least 3-to-1 of medical bills. That's what you want to pay attention to. Now, if your documentation creates at least 3-to-1 injury award to the documentation, you shouldn't be reducing your bill. And now that has happened. We just had a client, excuse me, Dr. Chris, he consulted with the attorney, showed the attorney how much was missing in the case, and the attorney was getting, I forget what it was, maybe it was $12,000, I think. Pointed out everything that was missing to the attorney. They send the case over to Dr. Chris. He works it up, gets all the documentation up and going, comes back and settles for $50,000. I think it went from 12. I think these were the numbers, but the concept is legitimate. It went from $12,000 to $50,000. Well, that was definitely over Dr. Chris's medical bill, 3-to-1 medical bills. And the attorney still asked him for a reduction. Now, a lot of times they do it because they're just so used to doing it. I mean, at every case, they're just, hey, can you reduce your bill? Can you reduce your bill? Can you reduce your bill? Okay. Well, thankfully, Dr. Chris knew that he had good documentation, and he's the reason it went from 12 to 50. And he knew the ratio. So he marches over there and points that out and goes, hey, you got 3-to-1 because of me, and you're asking me for a discount. Basically, Chris didn't put up with it. He goes, no, you got way more than what you would have gotten without me. And now you're wanting to cut me? See, he had the courage to stand for what was right. That's just like common sense. And I asked Dr. Chris, I said, well, how did he respond? And he goes, well, actually, the respect went up. He joked, he goes, yeah, you're right. And the respect went up. Didn't hurt the relationship at all. So just be ready. They're going to ask you for a reduction. Hell, if they get a 10-to-1, they're going to ask you for a reduction. So pay attention to that 3-to-1. If it's 3-to-1, don't cut your bill. But they do need education. They need to be reminded. They need to be reminded. I mean, how many times do we have to be reminded of stuff? All the time. Well, guess what? The attorney has to be reminded of stuff all the time. That's why I say the educational follow-up is so important. You'll lose. I can't tell you how many chiropractors got referrals from attorneys, did no follow-up. They stopped. All referrals stopped. They all stopped because they just stopped doing the follow-up. They stopped reminding the attorney of their value. I've had clients come in that have been practiced 20 years, 30 years, and they're looking to get attorney referrals. I'm like, you shouldn't. 20 years in practice, you should already have quite a few attorneys referring regularly after 20 years. They don't, because they lost communication with them. They lost communication. 20 years in practice. You should have quite a few attorneys referring to you regularly. 20 years in practice. You shouldn't even have to go out and market to attorneys. Okay. Now, this is just a side note. 20% is considered a professional discount. Just so you do know, there's something called a professional discount, and it's 20%. And it just kind of plays along professions. Here's an example. I have a dentist come into my office for care, chiropractic care. I'll give them a 20% professional discount. Other professions, it's routine to give a 20% professional discount. So there is a marker that's considered a professional discount. I just want you to know that 20% is considered a professional discount. Now, whether it applies to that case or not, you got to consider all these other factors. Don't just dole out 20% discounts left and right. And remember, if I got to, and we'll come back in when we go through the summary, we'll itemize out and go, if you got this, this, and this, stay strong. Okay. But if you got this, this, and this, then you want to seriously giving a reduction. And this is the reduction that I would look at. So we'll kind of conclude with that. So you must receive an itemized bill from the attorney. I want to know what everybody else is cutting. I want to know what everybody else is cutting. Now, I'm not paying attention to the attorney. I'm not paying attention to the attorney. A lot of times you go, well, what's the attorney cutting their bill? That's not what and again, it depends on the relationship with the attorney. How strong I'm going to do that. If I'm developing a relationship and it's an in-town attorney, I'm not paying attention to in other words, I'm going to continue referrals from that attorney. I'm not worried about the attorney's discount. I'm going to pay attention to everybody else. What is everybody else? Because here's what you don't want. You don't want to be singled out. That's what you don't want. So get an itemized bill from the attorney who you must know what the other medical providers are discounting. And if you got a decent attorney who's above board, they'll have no problems, or especially if you have a relationship with the attorney, they'll have no problems going, hey, here's what I was offered. Here's all the bills from everybody. And this is the discounts that everybody's, the people are looking at taking at this point in time. They'll have no problems doing that if you're dealing with a legitimate attorney. It's the ones you don't have relationships with, you don't know them, especially if they're out of town. Those are the ones that'll scam you. If you're going to have a probability of an attorney trying to scam you, that's the attorney out of town. He knows he's not going to work with you again. That's the guy that's going to try to not pay your bill or get you to, fight real hard for you to cut your bill, all that kind of stuff. Okay, this is a big one. You got to know your fixed expenses for the case. You got to have some reason, when you're going to come back with any type of discount. What are you going to be basing some of this on? So know your fixed expenses for the case. Know what your hard expenses are and know what your overhead expenses are. Okay. So the hard expenses are stuff you had to buy. Now, thankfully, in a chiropractor's office, you typically don't have to buy something and then mark it up and sell it. Usually that's like braces and supports. Even when you do, it's not big ticket items. Okay. So thankfully, the chiropractic office is mainly service oriented. So we usually have a high profit margin. But you definitely want to know your overhead. What is your monthly overhead? You want to know your overhead number. And this is what you want to know. Take your gross overhead. Now that's everything. Space, labor, equipment, everything. Take your overhead. Divide the number of hours you worked that month into your overhead. And you want to find out your cost per hour. Your cost per hour. Okay. And the reason you want to know that is that'll be a number that'll help support you from not going under that number, because you don't want to go under that number. That's because that's when you're going to lose money. So that helps support you getting a certain amount of money, a minimum amount of money. So make sure you know your overhead hourly. Then you want to know how many hours you spent with the patient. So whatever your hourly overhead is, okay, for cost per hour, your overhead. Then you go, well, how many hours did I spend with the patient? Well, look at your visits. Just look at your visits and estimate the average time the patient spent in your office. And don't get into like 7 minutes and 9 minutes. Just do 30-minute increment. Was it 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 90 minutes? Just ballpark 30, 60, 90 kind of thing. Now you got your hour, you got your number of visits, you know roughly the time that you spent, and you already know the overhead when they came in. They all of that was in the mix, space, labor, equipment, all that, malpractice insurance, heating and cooling, all of that. Okay. So multiply that out, and then that gives you a bare minimum number to not go under and to justify why you don't want to go under that number. Makes a lot of sense if somebody says, hey, these were my expenses. I can't go under this, or I'm actually losing money. See, now it's just not you being an SOB going, I'm not going to go under, I'm not taking less than 5,000. Well, now see the attorneys see 5,000 as profit. They don't know that maybe in that particular case, your expenses were 5,000. See, they don't know that. You're the one that has to point that out to justify you not going down a certain amount. Okay. Who brought the most value to the injury award? That's huge. If it were you, you're going to fight for your bill. And if you do give a reduction, it's going to be real small. If you didn't bring much to the injury award, well, then you deserve to cut your bill. But did you bring now? If you've gone through my course, you know if you're bringing value to the case. You know if you've got the 7 minimum categories that determine the strength of the case. You know how much primary evidence you have, secondary evidence, and multiple categories you have. You know that if you went through my course. Now, if you didn't go through my course, chances you don't know that. Chances are you think you're getting more. You probably think you're giving more value than what you really did. But when you go through my course, there's the quantification. Do you have the 7 minimum categories and even additional categories? Do you have the mechanism of injury, subjective, hybrid, and objective? And it was because of you. And is that what most of the case was based on? In other words, they didn't have surgery, right? They didn't have these other expensive medical procedures. So now it's pretty much based on you and your documentation. And so if you were the primary person that created that injury award and it was 3-1, we're not cutting that bill. We're going back to educate the attorney how valuable you are. They forget. Remember, they forget. And if you didn't do the presentation, they didn't forget. They never even knew because you didn't do the presentation. So who brought the most value? Did you bring value? You created the value, little to no reduction. And by the way, that's what's common with most of my doctors. Remember, most of the 80% of these cases are low impact injury cases. They don't require surgery. They don't have broken bones. They don't require rhizotomies. It's typically good soft tissue, connective tissue injury documentation from a chiropractor that's been trained in how to do it. That's what creates the 3-1 in the vast majority of these cases. If you know it and you actually did it. So, okay, consider an even cut percentage of the bill relative to the other providers. So on a percentage basis, if everybody's taking a 20% discount, you're just going to look really bad by not taking a 20% discount. So if everybody's taking 20%, then I just, whatever percent they're taking, 10%, whatever, you'll find that it's 20%. When they do a discount, you'll find it's typically a 20% professional discount. That's generally speaking what happens. But if everybody else is taking a 20% discount, then I just recommend take a 20% discount to make it work. Now, remember, what are you looking at? You should not be looking at your bill. Now, the bare minimum you look at is your overhead expenses. But what's the number one thing you should look at when you're looking at that bill? How much money is the client going to get relative to the attorney? That's the most important perspective of cutting your bill, because that's what the attorney cares about. What's happening with that client? Are they getting any money? Are they getting at least the same amount of money or more than the attorney? Because remember, usually the ratio is a third for a reason. a third goes to the attorney, a third goes to medicals, a third goes to the patient. That's the common industry language ratio right there. That's it. So is the patient going to get a third, the attorney gets his third, or the patient going to get their third? That's the most important aspect you need to be paying attention to relative to that bill and your discount. Okay, consider an even cut percentage. We talked about it. Out of town versus in town. That's huge. They're out of state, play hardball. And by the way, that's what they'll do to you. I said it all the time. The number one attorney that has the highest likelihood of screwing you and trying to not pay you is the out of town, especially the out of state attorney. That's your highest probability of. That's why you have to have all this legal paperwork signed. You have to get the letter of protection signed, and all this other the documents that we refer to.
Hey,
So,
Doc,
yeah.
I've had a few recently, middle of the case, just get dropped by the attorney that was out of state. How do I approach that?
Well, I don't know all the other circumstances. They probably dropped them because they found out there wasn't money there.
I mean, could they be lying to me and say they dropped him, trying to cut me out? So I would just
Oh
ignore it.
yeah, yeah. That's definitely true. Yeah, definitely.
So would the best course be to give them a call and say, what? How would I approach that?
Well, you don't give a phone. I mean, how much validity is a phone call in a court of law?
None.
Unless it's recorded, right?
Yes.
Okay, so if it's a phone call, it's just courtesy. You're not having any legal legitimacy unless you're recording it. Okay. So what creates the legal legitimacy? Power of attorney, limited power of attorney. That's where you can request. Did they drop it? Did they not drop it? Were they offered anything? Were they not? You can contact the insurance company directly. Did you give them an offer? Did you not give them? Did they drop the case? Or are they still on the case? The limited power of attorney gives you everything that whatever the patient can ask for, you can ask for. That's what you have to get. And yeah, I definitely would be verifying that. But
So pretty much standard rule is if they have an out-of-state attorney, always get that power of attorney signed.
that's just a general state of rule and with everything all the time.
Okay.
But that's the attorney who's gonna have the highest probability because they don't know you. There's no relationship there. It's real easy. And they know they're not going to probably deal with you again. That's the guy that has the highest likelihood of screwing you over. So I'm going to have the UCC. That's the only person I recommend having the UCC also sign with the state, a liability with the state. So I want him to sign a letter of protection, and then I'm signing UCC with the state because that's the guy that's going to probably screw you over. So, but generally, if an attorney, so I do want to verify that the attorney did. You don't want just the attorney's word or the patient's word. So send out your letter of send out a letter. Remember, you need it in black and white. You need it in black and white. So even if you got it on the phone call, it doesn't matter unless it's recorded. You need it in black and white. That's the limited power of attorney. So request that to the attorney. Did they drop the case or not? I'm sending it to the attorney. Are you still handling the case or not? I'm sending it to the insurance company. Okay. I want to know if he did. Now, if let's say it's true, the number one reason they do drop the case is they found out when they found out all the liabilities and all that, there's no money for them to get. That's usually why they do drop the case if that happens. And then you always want to refer that kind of case to one of your attorneys that you've built a relationship with just to verify. Just say, hey, check with this attorney, consult with him, and let's see if you do or don't have a case or what can potentially be done here. Always send them to one of your attorneys that you trust, that you built a relationship with. Okay, so who brought the most value? We talked about that. Consider an average. We talked about consider an even cut percentage of the bill relative to the other providers. Talked about out of town attorneys, out of town attorney. Play hardball with the out of town attorneys. If you're not going to see them again, they didn't refer. In others, the patient came in and they already had the attorney, and especially if he's an out of state attorney. Now, be careful out of town. They could be in the next county, but still have business, somewhat regular business in your county. Or they might have a satellite office in your county or something like that. So usually when I say out of town, I'm talking about these out of state attorneys. That's the ones you got to be really cautious about and make sure your paperwork is signed. So, okay, so that's, and again, I'm gonna ask for all the basic numbers. Would they settle? And I don't want him to give me an opinion. I want it in black and white. He got the offer in black and white. He didn't get it from a phone call from the insurance company. He got it in black and white. Why? Because that's when it's legal. It's not legal unless it's black and white. You guys, but I mean, the faster you realize this, the better you'll be in your career. You got to get everything in black and white. Otherwise, you don't have anything. So, okay. In-town attorney that regular, well, obviously, if it's an in-town attorney that regular refers, he's not going to be asking you to cut your bill unless there's some really dramatic reason, because he should have already been sold. He already knows the value of what you're doing. And that's why I say I never had an attorney, but I never had a medical bill that was less than 3-to-1. See, but if I had an attorney that was referring to me, and for whatever reason, my medical bill, and let's say it was just me and my medical bill, and for whatever reason, it did, and it came back less than 2-to-1. First thing I'm going to go is, why did it come back less than 2-to-1? Do I have a weak case? Well, if I had any permanencies, it's not going to come back less than 3-to-1. See, that's the key that takes it. As soon as there's a permanency, it should definitely take it over 3-to-1. That's like a marker. So if there's no permanency, so there was pain and suffering and the patient got better and there's no permanency. Now, my bill was still less than 3-to-1, but let's say your bill was greater than 3-to-1. And this is a dynamic at which it will probably happen. Let's say your bill is greater than 3-to-1, no permanency. So you're not going to get that much of an offer from an injury award. Now, this is very common with chiropractors, very common. Well, then I recommend you cut your bill. You got an in-town attorney you're working with. Your bill's too high. You were the problem. It never should have gotten that way. Again, if it's a permanency and he got a low ball offer and it's less than 2-to-1, what's the problem now? It's not the offer. It's not your documentation. You got a weak attorney, or the money's not there. The liability's not there. Well, you need to find this out. Is the money there? Or do I got a weak attorney? He's caving. And this happened to another client of mine. He sold the attorney, developed the relationship with the attorney, created authority, credibility, all that, got the referrals. And in one particular case, I remember the patient and this patient actually had a disc bulge. So they had a permanent problem. They had an impairment rating. And the attorney was willing to settle for I think it was like $12,000, $15,000, something like that. And my client, thankfully, was strong enough and he was aware enough. And he knew the relationship. He had the relationship. So he had some authority and control over the attorney because he did the presentation. So he was positioned in a position of authority. Okay. So these are the dynamics. Well, then he comes back and says, they want to settle for whatever, $15,000. And my client said, no. My client knew better. He knew he had the documentation. He had the subjective, hybrid, objective, primary, secondary, multiple categories. He had a good case. How did he know he had a good case? Because we taught him what's the bare minimum that determines the strength of the case. He knew he had a strong case. He had a weak attorney. So he knew the money was there. He found out the money was there. He knew he had a strong case because he was taught what was determined a strong or weak case. So he knew he had a strong case. The money was there. The attorney was caving. And he stood against the attorney. He told the attorney, don't settle, don't settle. And he basically even told the attorney, I've had 2 chiropractors do this now, 2 clients do this. He told the attorney, he said, if you settle for that amount, I'm not going to work with you again. Well, you can do that when you're in a position of authority and you know all this information, because you already know they're not going to get it anywhere else. They're not going to be able to find a Dr. Paul trained chiropractor down the street. They're going to run into the Yahoo with the sprain strain and, the big bill and little for documentation. That's who they're going to get. So from a position of strength, he said that. By the way, just on a similar note, I had another doctor that taught the attorney the deposition, the trial testimony sequence. Here's the sequence of questions, and here's the topics, and this is why. And he taught them, this is why you need to ask me and them in this order and cover it. Well, he didn't do it. He went through part of it, and then he kind of went to his own way. He didn't go through where he could build the case. And that chiropractor, again, my client, was strong enough to tell the attorney, because he had authority and credibility, because he did the presentation. He knew that case was based on what he did. He had strength in that case. And he told that attorney, he goes, don't do that again, or I'm never going to testify for you again. See, that's the way you should be positioned with attorneys, not suck ups. And you'll be a suck up when you don't know the documentation to create authority and credibility. That's when you will be a suck up. So anyway, back to the client that I had, he kept pushing him. He goes, no, don't settle. He said, I'm not going to work with you again, because he knew he created a tremendous value with that client. That wasn't just, new out of the blocks. Well, the guy didn't. He pushed, and they finally upped it to $50,000. He took it from like $15,000 to $50,000 because the client knew it was a good case. It was a solid case. Remember, if you got an impairment, you should definitely be getting a 3-to-1 medical. That alone is a marker. That's a marker. I was talking with one attorney. He goes, no, we get an impairment. I'm going for policy limited awards every time. And if they don't, I'm suing them every time. I'm like, whoa, that's the kind of attorney I want to work with. It's a whole different ballgame when you know what you're doing. And especially when you educate your attorney to where he now has authority and credibility in you with what you're doing. You talk about a strong team. That's how it should work, by the way. Okay, so in-town attorney that regular. So if it's in-town attorney regular FERS and it's less than 3-to-1, if it's greater 3-to-1, he's not going to ask you because he's a regular attorney. Or you got kind of a weird attorney. He's got to be straightened out like that, what Dr. Chris did. He's got to be reminded, hey, this is all the crap you got that I cleaned up. Okay, so in-town attorney who have never referred. Well, remember, those are good opportunities. I always call those opportunities. You just got to get to the sales presentation as fast as you can. There's nothing, the easiest attorney, I say this all the time, the easiest attorney to create referrals from is when you have a PI case walk in your door and they already have an attorney and that attorney is in your market. That's the easiest attorney to win over. Why? You already have a third-party connection. They have to listen to you. And I can personalize the whole presentation relative to that client. That's a slam dunk. That's a slam dunk. I'm creating a referral. I'm creating a referring attorney out of that guy. I've got a case like that right now. Client comes in, patient came in, already had the existing attorney. I didn't know him. He's a personal injury attorney and he's in the area. I'm coming right after him. I'm giving him the presentation, winning him over for all his referrals. Okay. And by the way, it's not just referrals in that geographic area. I've created personal injury marketing membership agreements. So I've got multiple offices throughout the county so I can cover when I sell that attorney, I've got him covered because I've got multiple marketing management agreements after I sell them, not just for this one location. Okay. So in-town attorney who's never referred, that's like fantastic. Did they refer or did the patient already have the attorney? Or remember what happens with that. If they came in with the attorney and they were not, here's the clue. Where's the emotional connection? So if they weren't a regular patient of yours, they were a new patient, and let's say they weren't referred, and a lot of times even if they were referred, but they already had the attorney. Generally speaking, the emotional connections with the attorney, not you. So if they're going to break with somebody, they'll break with you, not the attorney. Now, that's generally not true if they're like one of your existing patients, they get an accident and they get an attorney on their own without getting one of your referred attorneys. Even if they break for whatever reason, they'll leave that attorney and they'll stick with you. It's wherever the emotional connection is. That's what matters. So did they refer? Did the patient already have the attorney? So that's how that works. Key for the attorney, the patient makes the same or more money than, that's what, when you look at the whole case, don't just look at it from your perspective. The number one thing you want to look at is go, what's that attorney trying to protect his reputation? He's trying to at least get that patient the same amount of money he's getting or more, usually at least the same amount. That's the gig, okay? That's the big picture. And then you're going to look at all these other factors in whether or not you decide to take the bill, cut your bill, and how much you're going to cut your bill. So referring to attorneys often need to be reminded of the value. So just be aware of that. You got an attorney that you did the presentation to, and they're trying to cut your bill. They need to be reminded of that, of the value. Are they weak with good evidence? We covered that. So do you have a permanent injury? In other words, you're going to have a good case. You should at least have a 3-to-1. That's the marker. So there's lines in the sand. That's a good line in the sand to go, wait a minute, that medical bill should at least been 3-to-1 with the offer that we got a permanent problem here. What's the next thing you're going to do? Well, how much money is available? Well, maybe it's not available. How do you know that? You've got the limited power of attorney. Send off the letter and request what the terms are, what the limits of liability are. You're allowed to get all that information. And what the offer was. You get everything. You get nothing if you don't have it. Now it's just based on what the attorney wants to tell you. Okay. So again, are they weak? Remember, these C attorneys, they don't want to go to court. They won't go to court. So they'll kind of do everything they can not to go to court because that's not what they do. And when they do go to court, they won't go to court. They'll hire somebody that goes to court and give them a percent. So, there's pros and cons about the C attorneys. They're easier to work with, easier to contact, all that stuff. But they're not strong. They cave. So then you've got to know when to stand. You got to know when to take a stand and really push. Well, that's when to do it. Do you have 3-to-1 medicals, and was there a permanent impairment? Because you should at least be getting 3-to-1 if there was a objectively documented permanent impairment. And you have at least the 7 minimum categories, at least primary evidence in the 7 minimum categories that determine the strength of the case. You should be pushing that attorney and showing him and reminding him, giving him the evidence. In other words, make sure he has the authority and credibility in you that he can fight, because they can only fight based on what they have. That's it. And how much confidence they have in who gave it to them. That's it. A lot of these attorneys don't have doctors. Look around yourself. How many chiropractors would you want testifying on your behalf if you were injured. There's not a lot of them. I wouldn't want very many chiropractors that I would want on the stand testifying on my behalf relative to the injury. Well, that's what they're dealing with. They're not dealing with people who are strong with good documentation and good communication skills if they do a deposition or trial testimony. That's why you stand out so much when you have that ability. So referring to attorneys often needed to be reminded of your value. Okay, so weak attorneys. Was it your narrative report, deposition, or trial testimony that created the case value? Remember, it could be any of those. It starts with your documentation, the 7 minimum categories, and was there a permanent impairment? That's where it starts. Then did you have a good narrative report that gave all that information? And especially if it eventually went to deposition or trial testimony. And by the way, if your attorney is going to ask you to go into a deposition or trial testimony, he's never going to ask you to cut your bill. You're going to get paid in full because you're the man. That's what happened. They are looking for. There's an unbelievable high demand for doctors that not only know how to document and do a narrative report, but actually know how to communicate all this in front of in a deposition or trial testimony. There is very few doctors that know how to put a case together. Very few. That's why you win when you know how to do all this. So if you're ever in that situation, you'll never have to worry about getting your bill paid in full and your deposition or trial testimony fee. That will never be an issue. And that's where you want to take that relationship. You eventually want to take this attorney relationship to where he feels totally confident in you going after the money. And if they don't, suing them and putting you leading the charge for the attorney. That's the confidence level you want that attorney to have in you. Well, that takes education. That takes educational sales and not just one presentation. That takes follow-up. Okay, so we're paying attention to that. Okay, so these are all the factors that you want to consider. So what are some of the main factors that like carry a lot of weight? Well, is the money there? First of all, I'm going to go, is the money even there? Well, that's when you should be communicating with the attorney and seeing what's there and what's not. Okay, that's number one. It's not there, it doesn't matter. Number two, your documentation. Do you have the strength of documentation, especially is there a permanent impairment? That's like a marker in the sand. There's a permanent impairment. You should definitely be getting a 3-to-1 injury award, or you got a weak attorney, or the money's not there. There's one of those factors that's going on. So I'm going to pay attention to number one, is the money there? Number two, did we give a 3-to-1 injury award or better? Now that usually requires an impairment. There's usually not going to be a 3-to-1. And usually if there's no impairment, and that's usually because the doctor's bill is too big. That's why. It's just it's just a blown up bill. That's usually why. And then just take what you can and go from there, so to speak. But so was there a permanent impairment? Strength of the case? Was the money there? Is it a local attorney? Is it somebody I work with regularly? Remember, the guys that you work with regularly that you've educated, they protect your bill. My attorneys never asked me to cut my bill. Not one. Why? Because I educated them in all this information to where they knew they weren't going to get it anywhere else. That's why. They wanted to protect me. That's the number one way to stop getting your bill cut. Okay. So again, you're back to educational sales, follow up. It's about building the strength and authority in a relationship is what it's about. Okay. Is it local? Are they referring? Again, if that's happened, the only reason if it's local and it's a referring attorney is the money's not there, or the bill's too big for not having a permanent injury, in which case you should take a cut because you're the problem. These are the ratios. These are some of the lines in the sand that you need to be looking at. So local attorney, referring attorney, the amount of money in the case, the strength of your case. Was there a permanent impairment? Do you have the 7 minimum categories to determine the strength of the case? These are all the variables, the big variables I'm going to pay attention to. The money's not there, then I'm going to consider going to a 20% professional discount. Okay. Now, one thing I do want to make sure of is what were the total cost, because I don't want to go, if there's any way possible, I don't want to go below my how much time did I spend with that patient relative to the cost of my overhead? I don't want to go below that. Now you're losing money. And you have to show that to the attorney. Well, my overhead per hour is X. We spent X amount of hours with the patient. So my fixed expenses without profit is whatever, 3,000, 2,000, 4,000, whatever it is. See, now you gave a legitimate reason why you can't go under that number. Because now you're losing money, and everybody knows you can't be in business to lose money. So these are the main variables that you want to consider. And if they are those factors, people are taking discount, it is less than the 3-to-1. Let's say there's no permanent impairment. Your bill's probably too big in the first place. Consider giving the standard 20% professional discount. That's that. These are the variables you want to be paying attention to if and when you give a discount. But again, you should not have to be given a discount because you shouldn't have a big bill if there's no permanent injury. And if there was, your bill should easily get a 3-to-1. Either you have a weak attorney or the money's not there. These are the variables that you need to consider. Any questions about these variables when cutting your bill?
Hey Doc, I got a situation where I have an attorney. I did the sales presentation. It was a while, it was like one of my first ones, and I didn't do the proper follow up. And so I had a case where he basically went for a lowball offer, and I followed up with him on the case, and he had like all these excuses about like you know, all these different reasons and stuff like that. So it was probably my fault because I
Reasons for
didn't.
what? Reasons for what? You're saying he asked you to cut your bill?
Yeah,
Okay. Okay, go ahead.
and so I'm trying to get back to establish an authority again. So I'm trying to find a way to get in there and establish that authority again. And I wanted is a way you can help me with that. Have any advice on that?
So is the case already settled?
Yeah, the case is already settled, but I have other cases with him.
And did you cut your bill for that case?
He basically just sent me the bill. He just sent me a check, and it was less than a 3-to-1 ratio. So I already knew, this patient had a permanent injury, and I already knew it should have been greater than that.
Okay, so you cut your bill.
Yeah,
Okay. So you cut your bill. They did have the permanent. So you had a decent case, right?
right,
And it sounds like you didn't remind them of that at all.
right. At
Okay.
that time, nope.
Yeah, because remember, they're used to just settling, especially who? The C attorneys.
Right,
C attorneys, remember, C attorneys don't go to court. If you don't know that, they don't go to court. What if they get a good case, what do? They tie in with a trial lawyer. So they want to do everything they can to settle and not go to court. So that is a problem with the C attorneys. And so a lot of times you're the one that has to give them backbone and
okay,
explain why they should have backbone, meaning all these categories of the strength of the case. This is why it's so important that you be able to explain the strength of the case to the attorney. This is why it's another reason why it's so important. Okay. So you already settled. So you're in a different relationship. So what you're trying to do now is just so you set a bad precedent essentially, didn't you?
pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah. You set a bad precedent, and that's bad. The first time you do something, What do your kids do when they get away from doing something you told them not to do the first time?
Yeah, you know how that goes. It's totally
Yeah.
different.
Yeah, it's human nature. So you're way behind the eight ball now because you let the first one go without being challenged. So he's got to, you got to get back to him and remind him, the key components of the case, what determines the strength of the case, and why he should or should not settle. And by the way, what I just told you, the 7 minimum categories that determine the strength of the case,
Right,
it's a permanent problem, and you have at least the 7 minimum categories, he should not settle unless he gets a 3-1. That's the
right.
rule. That's the rule. Now, do you think the attorneys know that, Chris?
Nope.
They don't know that because it's medical. All those 7 categories and the details of it's the medical. They don't know that. They don't know how the pyramid comes together. Remember, they just have 3 concepts of the value of if there's a case. Was there a positive MRI? Did they have surgery? And was there a lot of property damage? That's their idea of if it was a good case or not. They don't understand the intricacies of the 7 minimum categories: primary evidence, secondary evidence, multiple category evidence. They don't know that. You're the one that has to be able to explain that to them. So if you do have a permanent problem, then you should be explaining to them that they should at least be getting 3-1, or they shouldn't settle. They should soon go to court because they have all the evidence they need to do it. Now they're going
Right.
to have medicals, and we know how to explain the medical formula, don't we? How to convert the doctor's documentation into the medicals, right?
Exactly.
We know how
Yep.
to do that. Explain it to them. The impairment injury award, explain it to them. The pain and suffering injury award, the formula, explain it to them. The prognosis and need for future care, explain it to him. You've got to lead him to that path. You've got to take his hand and lead him down that path to show him what he does and does not have. So what do you think is going to happen, Dr. Chris, if I had a permanent impairment? I had the bare minimum 7 categories: primary, secondary evidence, multiple categories. I explained how it was converted into the 4 injury awards. What do you think is going to happen to that attorney now? You think he's going to settle for less than
He shouldn't. No, he shouldn't settle. No.
You see how crazy it is after you know that information to settle for less than 3-1 now?
Right.
I mean, you got to be like out of your mind. So why are they doing it? Because they don't know any better. Who's the one that has to flip the switch and get them to see what they have? You. You. So what I would do, Chris, is I would go back and I would use the case that he settled as an example and go, hey,
Okay.
let's share with you this case and run through the example of what the money could have been for the 4 injury awards. Use the formula and guesstimate their wages and this and this and that, right?
Okay.
Guesstimate all those 4 injury awards and then come back to him and walk him through it. Go, look, there's the 7 minimum categories. You not only had primary evidence, secondary, you had multiple categories, and maybe you had more than the 7, right? 7's the minimum. You may have had injury magnifiers. You may have had, some of these other factors that help build the case horizontally. But so you showed them the bare minimum, how the case is put together. They got the permanent impairment. That should then go to the 4 injury awards and guesstimate, just give a guesstimation and show, here's what it could have been. How clear of a picture are you painting now, Chris?
Much more clear.
That's what you have to do.
Okay.
You got to go back to the one you settled on, and you got to show him he made a big mistake. Don't do it again.
Right.
Don't do it again. And if you are, don't ask me to cut my bill. If I give you a good case, if you want to cut your bill, go ahead. Don't ask me to cut my bill if I give you a good case.
So how does that conversation go? How's that phone call go?
You think it's a phone call? Are you crazy?
No. Just set that up. That's what I'm saying. I call them up and say, hey.
This better be in person, and it better be written out. You better have written this out, the 7 minimum categories, the primary, secondary evidence. You should have written it all out. Then you should have shown the 4 injury awards. And then, you want a visual here. You want to hold his hand and show him the visual and take him down the road. But yeah, the phone call is going to be pretty easy. You already have a relationship with them anyway, right?
Yep. Yep.
I'm just say, hey, let me just share with you. I did a rough evaluation of this last case, and I came up with a 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 injury award. And go to your guesstimation. I came up with a potential injury award after I converted the doctor's documentation into 4 injury awards. I came up with $40,000. I don't understand why you settled for 12. I tell you what, I'd like to come over and show you the documentation of how you can stop taking these offers and, with this documentation I'm giving you, and actually get 3-to-1 or greater. That's how I'm going to say it. I'm just going to let them know. I want to go to the meeting to show you how we can stop this from happening. And it shouldn't have happened with the last case. But when you use the last case, it's real, it's personalized, and it's real. That's what you have to be. That's what you have to do. Now, where do you think he's going to stand now? You go over and do that. You show him the 7+ minimum categories: primary evidence, secondary evidence, multiple categories. You show him the permanency and impairment rating. You show him the 4 potential injury awards and the formulas, and then you just guesstimate the money relative to the formulas for each individual injury award. Then you add up the injury award. What do you think he's going to be thinking now? You think he's going to stay in the same position and go, well, we settled and that's the way it should have been, and that's what I'll do in the future? You think he's going to stay in the same mentality after that?
No way. There's no way he can do that.
You can't. You can't. It's like a violation of human nature to see something so much better than what you got and not take what's better. There you go. But
Awesome.
That's how you need to straighten this thing out. You can't let this keep going on.
Right. Thanks, Doc. I'm going to do that today.
You're helping him. You're doing him a big favor. And Chris, last thing I want to say, who else is going to do that for him?
Nobody.
If you don't, who the hell else is going to help him like that?
Nobody will.
I say this with patients all the time, when I talk about educating your patients on the science of the 3 phases of healing. If they don't hear from you, who the hell are they going to hear it from?
Nobody.
Nobody.
No one.
Nobody. It's up to you. And you have the ability to do it now. That's how you win. That's how you create authority. That's how you create confidence. That's how you create credibility. That's how you create a ton of referrals. That's how you stop attorneys from asking you to cut your bill. That's how you stop attorneys from saying, you send me one, I'll send you one, crap. You become a winner. And you win for the attorney. And when you win for the attorney, you're going to win for yourself big. Just remember, you know way more than they do when it comes to the medical. You're always undervaluing yourself relative, just because they act bigger, they act with authority, they act like they know everything. With the law, give them the law. Medical, there's no way in hell they know how to put a case together like what we just did and win the damn case. They don't even have a clue. They're in la la land. You're the only one that can go in there and save them and help them and explain it. And by the way, let me personalize it a little bit. How would you like it if your mom went to an attorney like that, didn't know any better, and then he just had all this documentation, he had what he needed, and he just caved? And then he caved. So what did that do to your mom's injury award? And then what did that do to your profit?
That would be horrible.
How would you like that? That's what's going on with your family members out there. And that's what is going on. He's treating people's moms and brothers and sisters and sons and daughters, and he's doing that. That's good service? No. But he doesn't know it. He's in a state of unconscious incompetence, and he doesn't know it. And you're the only one that can flip the switch. There's not another attorney that can explain it. They don't know it. This is the medical part. And how many chiropractors have you met in how long you've been in practice? How long you been in practice?
13 years.
Yeah. How many chiropractors have you met that have been in practice that know this information that have not come through my course?
None.
Zero.
Zero.
Zero. The only people you know that know it have come through my course. What does that mean? That's called great opportunity. But who does it leave it up to now? Leaves it up to you. You're the one that has to educate that attorney. You're the one. And by the way, if I had that kind, somebody could give me that kind of information for my business, I'd take it every day of the week. You can create that much of a difference with my business, I'll take it every day of the week. You got to keep reminding yourself, they don't know. And even if you did the presentation, they forget. And they get, it gets less and less on their radar. That's human nature. It's not specific to any one individual. And that's called a great opportunity. That's what it's called. It's called unbelievable opportunity. There's like nobody that can do what you know or do in your geographic radius of draw, whether it's for regular patients, personal injury patients. There's nobody that can deliver this kind of information and support, not only help the patient, also the attorney. I just explained this with the PI patient. Did you get the links that I sent out that explained to the PI patient how they heal? That was one video, and the other video was should they hire an attorney or not, and how much they can expect for their case. Did you get those videos?
Yeah, I got those videos, Doc.
Did you watch them?
Yeah.
What'd you think about them?
They were awesome. I had
Chris,
no idea we could do all of that.
Chris, who else would have the ability to do that with that patient?
No one.
Nobody. When I explain how the 3 phases of healing, how our body heals, what it's based on relative to her injuries, what the therapy is going to be based on, and why, and how the whole layout, she's not going to get that from anybody. Then I go to the medical legal, and I go whether or not she should hire an attorney and what she can expect relative to an injury award. That's a common question patients have. And I went right in and explained that. Where else is she going to get that information? She's not. She's got to get it from you. Your patient's got to get it from you. Your attorneys have to get it from you. And thankfully, very few people know it. So that's why it's so easy to dominate the market. It's all communication, educational sales, education. You got to constantly, you're the one that should be leading them. They should not be leading you. And that's a whole different shift in mentality with chiropractors and attorneys. Usually they're all suck-ups. And that doesn't benefit the patient at all. That's when the patient loses. And then eventually you lose. You get your bill cut. You don't get the respect and authority and credibility from the attorney. You don't get the referrals. Everybody loses.